There's an organ sitting quietly in your body right now, working harder than almost anything else inside you, and most people never think about it once. Not until something goes seriously wrong. The heart gets all the attention. The kidneys get their fair share of concern. But the liver? It tends to get overlooked entirely. And that genuinely puzzles those of us who have spent years working in clinical medicine. Because what the liver reveals about a person's overall health is something that very few people outside of medicine fully appreciate. Here is what makes this organ so different from the others. When your lungs begin to struggle, you feel it immediately. Climbing a staircase becomes an ordeal, catching your breath takes effort, and the body gives you a very clear signal that something is off. When cognitive function starts to decline, you notice it in your memory, in the way your thoughts feel slower, in your mood, and your concentration. Even your kidneys tend to announce their problems in ways that are hard to miss. But the liver works silently. It performs hundreds of functions simultaneously every single hour of every day, and when it begins to show signs of strain, it does so quietly, subtly, and often for years before anything becomes obvious enough for most people to take seriously. Those of us who have spent time in emergency medicine reviewing blood panels day after day, thousands upon thousands of them over the course of a career, start to notice a consistent pattern. The liver markers, the numbers that reflect how well this organ is functioning, are almost always aligned with how healthy or unhealthy a person is overall. Long before someone feels seriously unwell, long before any dramatic symptoms appear, those numbers are already telling a story. The liver is already whispering something important, and the vast majority of people, including many in the medical profession, are not listening closely enough. What we're going to cover today is not end-stage liver disease. We're not talking about organ failure or advanced cirrhosis or jaundice. We're talking about the early phase, the window where things are still completely reversible, where the body is sending out manageable signals, and where the right response can change the entire trajectory of someone's long-term health. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, what sits at the center of this early dysfunction is metabolic health. Specifically, the accumulation of fat inside the liver itself, a condition that has now become the single most common liver disorder across the developed world. Before getting into the specific signs, it is worth spending a moment on what the liver actually does, because most people have only a vague idea, and the reality is far more impressive. Every drop of blood that leaves your intestines passes through the liver before it travels anywhere else in the body. The liver regulates how much glucose circulates in your bloodstream, storing the excess and releasing it when your blood sugar dips. It processes the fats you eat and manufactures bile, which your body depends on to break those fats down properly. It produces the clotting proteins that prevent you from bleeding uncontrollably after an injury. And it works continuously to neutralize the toxins, medications, alcohol, and metabolic byproducts that constantly flow through your circulation. That is an enormous workload, and when fat begins to collect inside the liver cells, the very earliest stage of metabolic liver disease, every single one of those functions starts to become less efficient. Not dramatically, not in ways that land you in a hospital right away, but subtly in ways that ripple outward and show up as symptoms that most people dismiss or misattribute entirely. The first of these symptoms is fatigue, and before assuming this is too generic to be useful, it is worth understanding the very specific mechanism behind it. One of the liver's core responsibilities is managing your body's short-term energy reserves, which are stored inside the liver cells themselves in a form called glycogen. When fat begins to infiltrate those same cells, it disrupts the insulin signaling that governs this entire process. The liver essentially stops responding properly to insulin's instructions, a state known as hepatic insulin resistance. What follows is erratic blood sugar regulation. Instead of a steady, reliable supply of energy throughout the day, you get unpredictable peaks and sudden drops. And layered on top of this, early liver dysfunction tends to generate low-grade systemic inflammation, which places an additional quiet burden on the body's resources. The immune system runs just slightly too hot, burning through energy in the background around the clock. The exhaustion that results from all of this is not the satisfying tiredness that follows physical effort or a productive day. It is a persistent background-level depletion, a sense of operating at half capacity, even when nothing particularly demanding has taken place. That specific mismatch, feeling drained without a clear reason, is worth paying close attention to. The second sign is a gradual expansion around the midsection, and the reason it matters goes well beyond aesthetics. There are two types of fat in the body. The soft fat just beneath the skin, the kind you can physically pinch, is largely cosmetic in nature. The far more clinically significant type is visceral fat, which accumulates deep inside the abdominal cavity, surrounding and pressing against your internal organs. Visceral fat and liver fat are not simply neighboring problems. They actively accelerate each other. Fat cells stored deep in the abdomen release fatty acids directly into the circulation that drains into the liver, essentially creating a constant stream of fat being delivered straight to liver tissue. Research has repeatedly shown that waist circumference is one of the strongest predictors of fatty liver disease, even in people who appear to be at a healthy weight by conventional measures. You can register as normal on a standard scale and still carry enough internal fat to significantly compromise liver function, a pattern sometimes described as being thin on the outside and metabolically compromised on the inside. A more reliable measure than weight alone is the ratio of your waist to your height. Your waist circumference in centimeters should ideally be less than half your height in centimeters. For someone who is 180 centimeters tall, that means a waistline below 90 centimeters. For someone at 160 centimeters, the target sits below 80. These thresholds are not arbitrary. They reflect the point at which visceral fat accumulation begins to meaningfully affect how your organs function. The third sign is one that tends to be quietly noted and then forgotten: a mildly abnormal liver enzyme result on a routine blood test. Two markers in particular are worth understanding. The first is called ALT, alanine aminotransferase, an enzyme that lives inside liver cells and only enters the bloodstream in meaningful quantities when those cells are being stressed or damaged. A persistently elevated ALT, even at a level that some laboratories still classify as borderline acceptable, is frequently the earliest biochemical footprint of fatty liver disease. The second marker, known as GGT, is especially sensitive to alcohol consumption, but also rises in response to oxidative stress building up within liver tissue. The frustrating reality is that because these elevations tend to be modest, they are easy to dismiss. Many people are told their results are slightly outside the normal range, given little further explanation, and sent on their way. If this has happened to you, the right response is not to leave it there. Request a follow-up test. Ask questions. Inquire about a liver ultrasound if you have reason to believe it might be warranted. This is precisely the stage where early action carries the most meaningful impact. The fourth sign is something many people struggle to put into words: a vague sense of pressure, fullness, or a dull, persistent ache in the upper right portion of the abdomen. This is where the liver sits, tucked beneath the lower ribs on the right side, encased in a tight, fibrous outer layer. As fat accumulates and liver tissue expands, that outer casing gets stretched. It contains its own pain receptors, and when placed under tension, it generates a dull, nonspecific discomfort that is very easy to confuse with digestive bloating, a strained muscle, or general abdominal unease. This is not the sharp, acute pain that comes with a kidney stone or an inflamed appendix. It tends to be low-grade, easily rationalized, and dismissed. People often live with this sensation for months or even years without once connecting it to their liver. The detail that makes it significant is persistence. When this discomfort stays localized to that right upper region and occurs alongside any of the other signals described here, it deserves proper investigation rather than continued reassurance. Fifth on the list is deteriorating blood sugar control, and this connects directly to one of the liver's most fundamental roles. After every meal, the liver acts as the body's glucose buffer, pulling excess sugar from the bloodstream and holding it in reserve, then releasing it back when levels drop between meals. When fat disrupts this process, The liver begins releasing glucose into the blood, even when levels are already elevated, a situation called inappropriate hepatic glucose output. The downstream consequence is chronically higher blood sugar. Someone tracking their HbA1c, which reflects average blood sugar over a 3-month period, might notice it creeping upward over successive tests. They might feel heavier and more sluggish after meals, or find themselves reaching for sweet foods more frequently as the body tries to compensate for unstable energy levels. This is the metabolic pathway that leads toward type 2 diabetes, and the liver is very often where that path begins. The sixth sign is a shift in appetite, specifically feeling full much earlier than usual during meals, or finding that the idea of eating, particularly in the mornings, simply does not appeal the way it once did. Chronic, low-grade liver inflammation interferes with the hormonal signals that regulate hunger and satisfaction, particularly the hormones responsible for telling the brain when the body has had enough. In addition, an enlarged liver can physically press against the stomach, creating a genuine mechanical reason for early fullness. This change in appetite tends to be gradual, noticed more clearly in retrospect than in the moment, and easily attributed to stress, aging, or habit. But when it represents a true shift from someone's previous baseline, it is worth factoring into the broader picture. The seventh sign is digestive discomfort after eating fatty or rich foods, a familiar heaviness, queasiness, or general sense of feeling unwell for an hour or two after a meal. The connection here runs through bile production. Bile is manufactured in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and released into the digestive tract to break down dietary fat. When liver function is compromised, this entire process slows down. Fatty meals do not get processed efficiently, and the result is that uncomfortable, bloated, nauseated feeling that many people have quietly started to associate with certain foods or with eating in general. It is frequently attributed to a sensitive stomach, food intolerance, or a digestive condition like irritable bowel syndrome. Sometimes that attribution is accurate. But when this pattern of discomfort after rich meals is accompanied by several of the other signals described here, it fits into a recognizable metabolic picture that points directly to the liver. If any of what has been described here sounds familiar, the most important thing to take away from this is not alarm. It is action. Push for a proper clinical appointment. Ask for comprehensive blood work that includes liver enzymes, fasting glucose, and a full lipid panel. If the wait for an appointment is prohibitive, consider whether a private blood test might be a worthwhile investment. An accurate picture of what is happening inside your body is among the most valuable pieces of health information you can have, and it does not require an extensive or expensive panel to get meaningful results. Do not simply attribute vague, persistent symptoms to the natural process of getting older, especially if you're not particularly old. What these signs represent, in most cases, is not damage that is beyond repair. The liver is one of the most regenerative organs in the human body. Studies have shown consistently that losing even 5 to 10% of body weight produces measurable reductions in liver fat and can, in many cases, return enzyme levels entirely to normal. The steps that produce these results are not complicated or extreme. Reducing consumption of heavily processed foods, cutting back on alcohol, improving sleep quality, and increasing dietary fiber, which nourishes the gut bacteria that help regulate inflammation throughout the liver, are all interventions with strong, consistent evidence behind them. The liver has been sending signals. It will keep sending them. What matters now is whether you choose to listen.